Pregnant teen disappears in wilderness. Hunters stumble on a bizarre sight. What is it? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The wind howled through the dense canopy of the ancient forest, carrying with it whispers of a chilling tale yet to unfold. 17-year-old Lydia Bennett tightened her tattered jacket around her small frame, her breath visible in the frigid air. She was several months pregnant, a secret she had carried like a heavy stone, growing heavier with every passing day. No one in her small town of Millstone had noticed. Her mother was too preoccupied with her third shift at the factory. Her father was long gone, and her friends, well, they had drifted away as the rumor mill churned around Lydia's unexplained silence and disappearance from parties. But Lydia knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. The father of her child, Jason Colby, had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her, tossing her aside like a discarded glove. Desperation had driven her here, deep into the wilderness, searching for solace or perhaps a miracle. The forest was no place for a young girl alone. It was vast, unforgiving, and notorious for the strange occurrences locals whispered about, but dared not investigate. The stories ranged from phantom lights to inexplicable disappearances. Hunters often returned with wide-eyed tales of shimmering figures and unnatural sounds. But Lydia, driven by her turmoil, wasn't afraid of folklore. She was afraid of the judgment waiting for her back home. As she trudged deeper into the woods, the world around her seemed to shift. The towering trees grew denser, their gnarled branches clawing at the gray sky. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness settled around her. Lydia's footsteps echoed faintly, the crunch of leaves underfoot breaking the eerie silence. The first sign that something was wrong came when she stumbled upon a circle of deer standing unnaturally still. Their eyes glinted with an almost human awareness, locked on her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. As she moved closer, the animals did not bolt. They merely tilted their heads in unison, watching her with an uncanny calm. Lydia muttered an apology under her breath and skirted around them, but the unease stayed with her. Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that twisted and danced in the dim light. Lydia's legs ached, and her swollen belly throbbed with every step. She sank onto a moss-covered rock to rest, rubbing her hands together for warmth. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and panic began to creep in. She had brought little with her, a small backpack with a granola bar, a bottle of water, and a blanket. It wasn't enough, and she knew it. Just as she was about to get up, a faint glow caught her eye. She turned, heart pounding, and saw what looked like a golden ring of light hovering a few yards away. It shimmered like a mirage, its edges crackling with tiny sparks. Lydia blinked, certain she was imagining it, but the glow only grew stronger. Against her better judgment, she approached it. The closer she got, the more she realized it wasn't just a ring of light. It was a portal. She could see shapes on the other side, though they were blurred and indistinct. Suddenly, a low growl echoed behind her. She whirled around to find a pack of wolves emerging from the shadows, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the portal. Lydia's breath hitched as they surrounded her, their movements slow and deliberate. Before she could react, a loud crack rang out, followed by a man's voice. "Don't move!" Lydia froze as a group of hunters burst onto the scene, rifles raised. There were 6 of them, their faces rugged and weathered. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard, stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his gaze shifting between Lydia, the wolves, and the glowing portal. The wolves growled but didn't attack. Instead, they backed away slowly, melting into the shadows as if summoned elsewhere. The hunters lowered their rifles, and the man approached Lydia cautiously. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Lydia nodded, though tears streamed down her face. I don't know what's happening." The man gestured to one of his companions, a younger man with sharp features and a nervous energy. "Sam, check the perimeter. Something's not right here." As Sam moved off, another hunter, a wiry woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped closer. "What's a girl like you doing out here alone?" she asked, suspicion lacing her tone. I... I just needed to get away, Lydia stammered, her hands instinctively moving to her belly. The woman's eyes flicked to her swollen stomach, and her expression softened, though her concern deepened. "You're pregnant," she said, more to herself than anyone else. Before Lydia could respond, the portal crackled loudly, drawing everyone's attention. The golden light pulsed, and a figure began to emerge. It was humanoid but otherworldly, its form shimmering like molten gold. The hunters raised their rifles again, but the leader held up a hand. "Wait," he said, his voice low. The figure stepped fully into the clearing, and the air grew heavy with an unearthly energy. It looked at Lydia, its eyes glowing with an indescribable warmth. Then, in a voice that seemed to resonate in their very souls, it spoke. "You should not be here." The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, but Lydia felt an inexplicable calm wash over her. "I didn't mean to come here," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know where else to go." The figure tilted its head, as if considering her words. "You carry more than a child," it said. "You carry a purpose." The hunters stared in stunned silence, their weapons hanging limply at their sides. The figure turned its gaze to the leader. "Protect her," it said. "She will need you." Before anyone could respond, the figure dissolved into a cascade of golden sparks, and the portal collapsed with a deafening crack. The clearing was plunged into silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the wind. The leader let out a shaky breath and turned to Lydia. "Looks like you're coming with us," he said. Lydia hesitated, but the alternative, staying alone in the forest, was far worse. She nodded, and the hunters began to lead her back the way they had come. But as they walked, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter was only the beginning of something far bigger than any of them could imagine. The group moved cautiously through the forest, their steps heavy with unspoken questions and unease. Lydia walked in the center, flanked on all sides by the hunters, their rifles still at the ready. The leader, whose name she learned was Grayson, kept casting sidelong glances at her, his expression unreadable. The wiry woman introduced herself as Marla and seemed to soften with every passing moment, though her sharp tone remained intact. "How far along are you?" Marla asked as they trudged along a narrow trail lined with mossy stones. 7 months, Lydia said quietly, clutching her belly. The admission felt like a confession, and she braced herself for judgment. But to her surprise, Marla simply nodded. "Out here like this, 7 months along?" Marla muttered under her breath, shaking her head. "You've got guts, kid. Or desperation." Grayson interrupted before Lydia could respond. "We don't have time for small talk. Something's wrong with the woods tonight." He turned to Sam, who had taken point ahead of the group. "What did you see up there?" Sam hesitated, his face pale. "Tracks," he said, "but not from any animal I've ever seen. Big, clawed, and deep, as if something heavy was dragging itself through the dirt." Lydia's breath hitched. "The wolves? Do you think they'll come back?" Marla shook her head. "Those weren't normal wolves. The way they moved, the way they looked at us." She trailed off, her lips pressed into a thin line. Grayson grunted. "Wolves don't matter right now. Whatever came out of that portal does, and we need to get this girl somewhere safe before it decides to come back." The group pressed on, the forest around them growing darker and more oppressive. Shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, and the once familiar sounds of the wilderness, birdsong, rustling leaves, distant animal calls, had all but vanished. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They finally reached a small hunting cabin nestled in a clearing. It was old and weather-beaten, but sturdy, with thick wooden walls and reinforced windows. Grayson opened the door and ushered everyone inside. The cabin smelled of pine and smoke, the scent of countless hunting trips embedded into its very walls. A stone fireplace dominated one corner, and Marla immediately set to work building a fire while Sam bolted the door. The group settled in, the tension palpable. Lydia sat on an old couch, her hands resting on her belly as she tried to process everything that had happened. Grayson leaned against the wall, his rifle slung over his shoulder, while the other hunters, Sam, Marla, a quiet man named Theo, and a burly tracker named Jonas, whispered among themselves. "All right," Grayson said, his voice cutting through the hushed conversation. "We need to figure out what's going on. Lydia, start from the beginning. What brought you out here?" Lydia hesitated, her cheeks flushing. She had been so consumed by her fear and exhaustion that she hadn't even considered how strange her story might sound to these strangers. But as their expectant gazes bore into her, she realized she didn't have much choice. I needed to get away," she began. Her voice was shaky, but she forced herself to continue. "My mom doesn't know I'm pregnant. No one does, except for—" She trailed off, her throat tightening. "The father doesn't want anything to do with me. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere anymore." Marla's expression softened, and even Grayson's stern features seemed to relax slightly. "So you just walked into the forest?" he asked, his tone gentler than before. "I didn't know where else to go," Lydia admitted. "But then, I saw that portal, and the wolves. And now—" She shook her head, unable to put the rest into words. Grayson exchanged a look with Marla, who nodded. "We've all heard the stories," Marla said, "about this forest. Strange lights, people disappearing, animals acting off. I always thought they were just campfire tales, but now—" She glanced at Lydia. "Now I'm not so sure." As if on cue, a low, rumbling growl echoed from outside the cabin. Everyone froze, their eyes snapping to the windows. The growl was followed by another, then another, until it seemed to come from all directions at once. Jonas grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "Something's out there," he said, his voice low. "And it's not wolves this time." Grayson moved to stand beside him, his hand resting on his rifle. "What do you see?" Jonas didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was laced with fear. "Eyes," he said. "Dozens of them, glowing, just like the portal." Lydia's heart raced as she clutched her belly. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, charged with the same unearthly energy she had felt earlier. She could sense something was coming, something far more dangerous than the wolves. The first attack came without warning. The door rattled violently, and the cabin shuddered as if something massive had slammed into it. Marla grabbed Lydia and pulled her toward the back of the cabin. "Stay down," she hissed. Grayson barked orders, his voice calm and commanding despite the chaos. "Theo, cover the windows. Sam, watch the door. Jonas, you're with me." The cabin erupted into a frenzy of movement as the hunters prepared to defend themselves. Lydia crouched in the corner, her hands trembling as she tried to stay out of the way. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Whatever had come through that portal wasn't done with them yet. The pounding at the door intensified, each slam reverberating through the cabin like a drumbeat of impending doom. Dust and wood splinters fell from the frame, and the air inside grew suffocatingly tense. Lydia clutched her belly, her breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. Marla crouched beside her, one hand gripping a hunting knife and the other steady on Lydia's shoulder. "Whatever happens," Marla whispered, her voice tight but steady. "Don't move unless I tell you to. Got it?" Lydia nodded, though her heart felt like it might burst from her chest. The baby shifted inside her, as if sensing her terror. She winced at the movement, but there was no time to dwell on it. The hunters were already springing into action. "Jonas, with me!" Grayson barked, his voice cutting through the chaos as he motioned toward the door. He and Jonas braced themselves against it, their combined weight barely holding it shut against the relentless assault. Sam and Theo positioned themselves by the windows, rifles aimed at the glowing eyes now visible just beyond the glass. "What are those things?" Theo muttered, his finger hovering over the trigger. "I don't care what they are," Grayson growled. "If they break through, we put them down. No hesitation." A shattering crash echoed from the back of the cabin. Everyone turned just in time to see a large, clawed hand punch through the wood, splintering the wall like paper. The hand was unlike anything Lydia had ever seen. Long, sinewy fingers tipped with razor-sharp talons that glowed faintly with the same golden light as the portal. A guttural snarl followed, and a second claw joined the first, ripping through the wall with terrifying ease. "Marla, get her out of here!" Grayson shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. Marla didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed Lydia's arm and hauled her to her feet, steering her toward a trap door hidden beneath a threadbare rug in the corner. "Down there," Marla said, yanking the door open to reveal a narrow set of steps leading into darkness. "It's the root cellar. Stay put and don't make a sound." Lydia hesitated, her gaze darting to the hunters as they fought to hold off the encroaching creatures. "I can't just leave." "You can and you will," Marla snapped, pushing her toward the opening. "You've got more than yourself to think about now. Go!" With no other choice, Lydia climbed down into the cellar. The air was damp and cold, the faint smell of earth and decay filling her nostrils. She crouched at the bottom, her heart pounding as she listened to the chaos unfolding above her. The sound of splintering wood, gunfire, and unearthly growls filled the cabin, mingling with the shouts of the hunters. Grayson's voice rose above the din. "Keep them back! Don't let them get inside!" A deafening roar shook the cabin, followed by a crash so loud it rattled the walls of the cellar. Lydia clamped her hands over her ears, her body trembling. The baby kicked hard, as if urging her to move, to flee, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped, helpless as the battle raged on above her. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. The abrupt stillness was almost more terrifying than the noise had been. Lydia held her breath, straining to hear anything. Footsteps, voices, even the creature's growls, but there was nothing. Just the heavy, oppressive silence pressing down on her. She waited, her heart hammering in her chest, until finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Slowly, she climbed back up the steps, her movements cautious and deliberate. She pushed the trapdoor open just enough to peer out. What she saw made her blood run cold. The cabin was in ruins. The walls were riddled with gaping holes, and the floor was littered with debris, splintered wood, shattered glass, and the remains of furniture. Blood smeared the walls in long, jagged streaks, and the air was thick with the metallic scent of it. But the hunters were gone. "Grayson?" Lydia called out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Marla? Sam?" No response. The only sound was the faint crackling of the dying fire in the hearth. She climbed fully out of the cellar, her steps unsteady as she surveyed the devastation. The golden glow that had surrounded the cabin earlier was gone, leaving the room bathed in an eerie gray light. Her stomach tightened, not just from fear but from a sharp, sudden pain. She gasped, clutching her belly as the pain radiated through her body. "No," she whispered, panic rising in her chest. "Not now, please, not now." Another wave of pain hit her, stronger this time, and she sank to her knees, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. She knew what was happening: labor. It was too soon, but her body didn't seem to care. The baby was coming and she was completely alone. Or so she thought. A soft, melodic hum broke the silence, sending a shiver down her spine. She looked up and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was humanoid, like the one she had seen earlier, but this one was darker, its form wreathed in shadows that seemed to ripple and shift like smoke. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with warmth like the first figure, but with an unsettling, predatory light. "You," Lydia croaked, her voice barely audible. "What do you want?" The figure tilted its head, the hum growing louder, resonating in her bones. It raised a hand and pointed at her belly. "You carry more than a child," it said, its voice low and guttural, echoing like a chorus of whispers. "You carry the key." Lydia's heart pounded as the words sank in. She didn't understand what it meant, but the weight of them filled her with dread. She tried to move, to crawl away, but the pain in her belly rooted her to the spot. The figure took a step closer, its shadowy form growing larger, more imposing. "Give it to me," it said, its voice a command that made her entire body tremble. Lydia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." The figure growled, a sound that reverberated through the ruined cabin. It reached out, its hand stretching toward her, and then, out of nowhere, a shot rang out. The figure recoiled, its form flickering like a dying flame. Grayson burst into the room, his rifle smoking. "Get away from her!" he roared, firing another shot. The figure snarled, its shadowy form dissipating into wisps of smoke that vanished into the air. Grayson rushed to Lydia's side, his face pale and streaked with blood. "We need to get you out of here," he said, his voice urgent. "Now!" Lydia nodded weakly, clutching his arm as he helped her to her feet. But as they stumbled toward the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that the figure's words would haunt her forever. Grayson's grip on Lydia's arm was firm but gentle as he half carried, half supported her out of the cabin. The forest outside was cloaked in an unnatural darkness, the trees swaying in a wind that Lydia couldn't feel. The air was thick, heavy with a charged energy that prickled at her skin. Every step was a struggle. Her body was racked with pain, her swollen belly a constant, throbbing reminder of how dire the situation had become. "Where are the others?" Lydia managed to ask, her voice strained. Grayson didn't answer right away. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning their surroundings with the hyper-alertness of a seasoned hunter. Finally, he said, "They're gone. I don't know if they made it out, or if those things got to them." Lydia's stomach churned, a mixture of fear and grief threatening to overwhelm her. She had only known the hunters for a short time, but their faces flashed in her mind. Marla's no-nonsense demeanor, Sam's nervous energy, Jonas's quiet strength. She wanted to believe they were still alive, but the bloodstains and wreckage in the cabin painted a grim picture. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Grayson glanced at her, his face grim. "There's a ranger station about 2 miles from here. If we can make it there, we can call for help." 2 miles. It might as well have been 20. Every step sent a fresh wave of pain through Lydia's body, and she could feel the contractions coming closer together. She clung to Grayson, her breathing ragged, her vision blurring with tears. "You're going to have to hold on," Grayson said, his tone firm but not unkind. "I know it's bad, but you've got to stay strong, for the baby." Lydia nodded, though she wasn't sure how much strength she had left. Her entire body felt like it was on the verge of collapse. But as they stumbled through the forest, she realized she didn't have a choice. If she gave up now, she and the baby would die out here. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees growing denser, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy that blocked out what little light remained. The golden glow that had accompanied the portal earlier was gone, replaced by an oppressive darkness that seemed to pulse with malice. Grayson stopped suddenly, holding up a hand to signal Lydia to stay quiet. She froze, her heart pounding as she followed his gaze. Up ahead, just visible through the gloom, was another one of the creatures. It was larger than the one in the cabin, its shadowy form shifting and rippling as if it were made of smoke. Its glowing eyes were fixed on them, unblinking and predatory. Grayson raised his rifle, his movements slow and deliberate. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Lydia didn't need to be told twice. She crouched behind him, her hands clutching her belly as if that alone could protect her child. Her breath hitched as the creature took a step forward, its movements unnervingly fluid. Grayson fired. The shot rang out, the sound echoing through the forest, but the bullet passed through the creature as if it were made of air. The creature snarled, a low, guttural sound that made Lydia's blood run cold. "Run!" Grayson shouted, grabbing Lydia's arm and pulling her to her feet. They ran, Grayson half dragging Lydia as she stumbled over roots and rocks. The creature gave chase, its movements impossibly fast. Lydia could hear its snarls growing louder, closer, and she knew they couldn't outrun it. "Here," Grayson said, veering off the trail and toward a rocky outcrop. He pushed Lydia ahead of him, urging her to climb. "Go! Get up there!" Lydia scrambled up the rocks, her hands slipping on the damp surface. The pain in her belly was excruciating, but adrenaline kept her moving. She reached the top and turned to see Grayson standing at the base of the outcrop, his rifle aimed at the creature as it closed in. "Come on!" she shouted. But Grayson didn't move. "I'll hold it off," he said, his voice steady. "You keep going." "No!" Lydia cried, tears streaming down her face. "You can't—" "Go!" Grayson barked, cutting her off. Lydia hesitated for only a moment before the reality of the situation sank in. She had to keep moving. For her baby, if not for herself. She turned and stumbled away, her vision blurred with tears. Behind her, she heard the sound of gunfire, followed by a deafening roar. She didn't look back. The forest seemed endless, every step a Herculean effort. The contractions were coming faster now, each one more intense than the last. Lydia's legs gave out and she collapsed onto the forest floor, her body trembling with exhaustion. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't." But then, through the haze of pain and despair, she heard a voice. Soft, melodic, and impossibly familiar. "You're stronger than you think, Lydia." She opened her eyes and saw the first figure, the one she had seen emerge from the portal, standing before her. Its golden light bathed her in warmth, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a glimmer of hope. "You must keep going," the figure said, its voice resonating in her mind. "The child you carry is more than you know. They are a bridge, a beacon of light in the darkness. But you must fight for them." Lydia nodded weakly, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know how," she admitted. "I don't have anything left." The figure knelt beside her, its hand hovering just above her belly. "You have everything you need," it said. "The strength of a mother is unmatched. Trust in yourself, and you will prevail." Before Lydia could respond, the figure vanished, its light fading into the shadows. But the warmth it left behind lingered, filling her with a renewed sense of purpose. With a deep breath, Lydia pushed herself to her feet and began to walk, each step bringing her closer to an uncertain but vital future. The pain was still there, the fear still gnawed at her, but she would not give up. Not now, not ever. The forest felt alive, breathing and watching as Lydia forced herself forward. Each step was agony, her body screaming for rest, but she knew stopping wasn't an option. The memory of Grayson's sacrifice lingered in her mind, fueling her determination. If he had risked everything for her and her child, she couldn't let his effort go to waste. The rhythmic pulse of her contractions grew stronger, sharper, and more insistent. Her hands instinctively cradled her belly as she stumbled through the thick underbrush. The path ahead was uneven, littered with roots and rocks, but she could see a faint light in the distance. It flickered like a beacon, barely visible through the dense trees. Lydia's thoughts were muddled, torn between hope and despair. The golden figure's words replayed in her mind. "The child you carry is more than you know. They are a bridge, a beacon of light in the darkness." What did that even mean? Why was this happening to her? She wanted answers, but for now, all she could do was keep moving. The light grew brighter as she drew closer, revealing an ancient, crumbling stone structure hidden in the heart of the forest. It looked like an old chapel, its walls covered in moss and ivy, its roof partially collapsed. The glow seemed to emanate from within, casting long, shifting shadows on the forest floor. Lydia hesitated at the entrance, her hand resting on the cool stone of the archway. The air inside felt different, warmer, almost soothing. She stepped through the doorway, her footsteps echoing softly in the vast, empty space. The light was coming from a pedestal in the center of the room, where a strange, ornate artifact sat. It was a golden disc, covered in intricate symbols that seemed to shimmer and shift as she looked at them. Before she could take another step, the air behind her shifted, and a low growl rumbled through the chapel. Lydia turned, her heart plummeting as she saw one of the shadowy creatures from the forest standing in the doorway. Its glowing eyes locked onto hers, and it took a slow, deliberate step forward. Lydia backed away, her body trembling. She glanced at the artifact, then back at the creature. The golden figure's words echoed in her mind. "The child you carry is a bridge." What did it mean? Was the artifact connected to her somehow? To the baby? The creature lunged, its claws raking through the air, and Lydia barely managed to throw herself out of the way. She hit the ground hard, the impact jarring her already fragile body. Pain shot through her, and she cried out, clutching her belly as another contraction racked her body. The creature snarled, advancing on her, but before it could strike, the artifact on the pedestal began to glow more intensely. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, and the creature hesitated, its form flickering like a flame in the wind. Not Lydia didn't understand what was happening, but she knew she had to act. Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, she crawled toward the pedestal. The light from the artifact seemed to grow warmer, more inviting, as she drew closer. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cool surface of the golden disc. The moment she touched it, a wave of energy surged through her, and the room was filled with blinding light. The creature let out a deafening roar, its form disintegrating into wisps of shadow that were quickly swallowed by the light. Lydia felt a strange warmth spreading through her body, soothing her pain and filling her with an overwhelming sense of peace. When the light faded, the chapel was silent once more. Lydia lay on the ground, her breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. The artifact was gone, and the room felt emptier somehow, as if something vital had been taken away. But the peace was short-lived. Her contractions returned with a vengeance, sharper and more urgent than before. She cried out, clutching her belly as her body prepared for the inevitable. She was going into labor, and there was no one here to help her. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to steady her breathing. "I can't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't." But then, a gentle, familiar warmth enveloped her. She looked up and saw the golden figure standing over her, its light softer this time, almost maternal. "You are not alone," it said, its voice resonating in her very soul. "You have the strength of a mother, Lydia. Trust yourself." The figure knelt beside her, its glowing hands hovering just above her belly. The warmth intensified, dulling the edge of her pain and filling her with a sense of calm. She closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing, letting the figure's presence guide her through the ordeal. Time seemed to blur as the golden light surrounded her, shielding her from the fear and pain. She felt the baby move, its presence strong and vital, and for the first time she felt a glimmer of hope. She could do this. She would do this. With one final, excruciating push, the baby was born. Lydia collapsed onto the stone floor, her body trembling with exhaustion. The golden figure cradled the infant in its arms, its light illuminating the tiny, squirming form. "You have done well," the figure said, its voice filled with warmth and pride. It placed the baby in Lydia's arms, and she looked down at her child. A beautiful, perfect baby with eyes that shimmered like liquid gold. What happens now?" Lydia asked, her voice barely audible. The figure's light began to fade, its form growing fainter. "Your child is special, Lydia. They are a bridge between worlds, a beacon of hope. Protect them, nurture them, and they will grow to fulfill their purpose." Before Lydia could ask more, the figure disappeared, leaving her alone in the chapel with her newborn. The forest outside was silent, the oppressive darkness lifted. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lydia felt a sense of peace. She held her baby close, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "We're going to be okay, I promise." The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but Lydia knew one thing for sure. She would do whatever it took to protect her child. Together, they would face whatever the future held. And for the first time, she felt strong enough to face it. The silver light surrounded Lydia and her baby, wrapping them in an otherworldly warmth. The tension in her body ebbed away, her fear dissolving like mist in the morning sun. She glanced at her baby, who had fallen silent, staring up at her with those luminous golden eyes. The child was calm, almost as if it understood the safety they had found in this sacred place. The forest outside the clearing still pulsed with danger. The shadows writhed and twisted at the edge of the light, the creature's guttural snarls reverberating in the distance. It wasn't gone, but it couldn't enter. Lydia knew this wasn't over, but for now, she had time to breathe. A figure materialized from the light of the tree, its form similar to the golden being that had guided her before, but now appearing more solid, more defined. It was tall and radiant, with features both human and otherworldly. Its voice was soft, almost musical, as it addressed her. "You have done well, Lydia," it said. "Your strength and the love you bear your child have brought you here." "What is this place?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and exhaustion. "What's happening to me? To my baby?" The figure knelt before her, its glowing eyes meeting hers. This place is a sanctuary, a bridge between your world and another. It is ancient, forgotten by most, but it remains a haven for those who seek it. You were drawn here because of the child you carry. Lydia looked down at her baby, her arms instinctively tightening around the small bundle. What does my baby have to do with any of this? She asked. Why are those things chasing us? The figure's expression softened, its light dimming slightly as it spoke. Your child is unique, Lydia. They are a bridge between worlds, born of this world, but touched by the light of another. They have the power to heal, to unite, to bring balance where there is chaos. But there are forces that would use that power for destruction. The shadows you encountered are just the beginning. Lydia's heart sank. She had barely survived the last encounter. How was she supposed to protect her child from something so much bigger than herself? I can't do this, she said, her voice breaking. I'm just a kid. I'm not strong enough. The figure placed a glowing hand on her shoulder, and a wave of calm washed over her. You are stronger than you know. The bond between a mother and her child is the most powerful force in existence. Trust in that bond, and you will find the strength to face what lies ahead. Before Lydia could respond, the shadows at the edge of the clearing began to shift violently. The creature had returned, larger and more menacing than before. Its crimson eyes burned with rage, and its growls sent shivers down Lydia's spine. The light of the tree flickered, as if struggling to hold the darkness at bay. You must go, the figure said urgently. The sanctuary's light is weakening. There is a path beyond the tree that will lead you to safety. Follow it, and do not look back. What about you? Lydia asked, panic rising in her chest. The figure stood, its form glowing brighter. I will hold them off as long as I can, but you must go now. Lydia hesitated, but the baby stirred in her arms, its soft whimper snapping her out of her fear. She nodded and turned toward the glowing path that had appeared behind the tree. The light was faint, but it was enough to guide her. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. The figure nodded, its light intensifying as it turned to face the advancing creature. Lydia didn't wait to see what happened next. She ran, her baby held tightly against her chest, her feet moving as fast as they could carry her. The path twisted and turned, the forest growing darker and more oppressive the farther she went. But the light of the path never wavered, guiding her through the chaos. Behind her, she heard a deafening roar, followed by a blinding flash of light that illuminated the forest for a brief moment. Then, silence. Lydia didn't stop running until she burst out of the forest and into the open air. She found herself standing on the edge of a small town, its lights twinkling in the distance. Relief flooded her, and she collapsed to her knees, clutching her baby as tears streamed down her face. For the first time, she felt truly safe. Months later, Lydia sat on the porch of a small house on the outskirts of the town, rocking her baby in her arms. The forest loomed in the distance, but she no longer felt fear when she looked at it. She had faced the darkness and survived. Her baby cooed softly, its golden eyes shimmering in the sunlight. Lydia smiled, brushing a strand of hair from its face. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would do whatever it took to protect her child. The figure's words stayed with her, a reminder of the strength she had found within herself. She was no longer the scared, lost girl who had wandered into the woods. She was a mother, and she was ready to face whatever came next. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, Lydia whispered to her baby, "We've got this, together." And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed it.